All right, good morning and welcome everyone. My name's Julie Shields Rutina, and I am the Director of College Planning, Education, and Training at MEFA. And we're here this morning to talk about financial aid, a very important topic, with a terrific presenter, Susan Beard, who is the Senior Director of Student Financial Services at Wheaton College. So let me just tell you a little bit about MEFA, and I want to share a few resources that we have for you that will be so important this fall and always. But MEFA is a state authority created by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in 1982 with the mission of helping families plan, save, and pay for college. And we're still doing that today with the state's two college savings plans, the U plan and the U fund, as well as the attainable savings program for someone with a disability to begin saving. We also have low-cost loans for families who need that type of financing when it comes to paying for college. And then everything else that we do is in the area of advising and guiding families around saving, planning, and paying for college. And so let me just show you some resources that are specific to you, and then we'll talk about the logistics. I'm going to share my screen here, Susan. Okay. That's great. So this is a page on the MEFA website with resources specific to you, school counselors and other advisors of students. And so I want to point that out to you. There are so many resources here that you'll be able to use through the year, including learning about any other webinars and events that we have. Today, you're going to hear a general overview of the financial aid process. But with so many changes this year, we're going to have many other webinars about the CSS profile, about helping your students create an FSA ID. We're going to have a webinar where we go through some scenarios of some challenging circumstances. So please stay connected with me for this fall for everything that you need. Also on this page, right at the top for you, so you can access it quickly, we share with you the pages where we have resources for families. So right here, this college financial aid page for families is something that you can share this link with your families so that all of the webinars and events we have for them are right here in one place. And we have a timeline, and we have blogs on financial aid topics, as well as some great videos. So please share that with all of your families so that they have access to all of this great and needed financial aid information. And finally, this lesson today, this webinar today, is part of the MEFA Institute. So please know that you can receive professional development points for that. And when we follow up with you, you'll be able to do that. So with that, I'll just we'll go back and I'll just say a few logistics about the webinar this morning. On the next page, yes. So if you have questions this morning, please type them into the Q&A, and we will make sure to answer your questions. And I may ask a burning question out loud to Susan while she's presenting, or we may wait until the end, but we will answer your questions. And if you would like closed captioning, please press the live transcript button, and you will see the words that we're speaking across the screen. And a nice feature of the live transcript feature is that you can choose the language that you see for those words that are coming across your screen. So that's great. And that works for our webinars for families and students as well. And finally, we're recording this webinar, and we will send you a link to the recording and to the slide deck tomorrow, if you have to leave early or something like that. So with that, thank you. And I'll be behind the scenes helping here. But Susan, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Julie. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us early. Well, it's not early for you guys. You've been probably hard at work for the last hour and a half, but I am pleased to be here. So honored to be part of the MEFA family as far as helping you all learn, helping myself learn, and our families that we talk to each and every day. Especially with the year that's unfolding ahead of us. There's a lot of things that are different, but there are still a lot of things that are the same. So for those of you who are brand new to this, you're going to learn a lot of great things. For those of you who have been doing it for a number of years, not everything has changed. And that's how I make myself feel good every day when I start to feel overwhelmed with thinking about a whole new FAFSA and new deadlines and what it means for colleges and the Department of Education and our high schools. So hopefully you will still, again, everybody will hopefully learn something today. Please ask questions. Julie's going to be helping out with answering them and fielding them. And yeah, hopefully we will answer everything you have brought or bring to us this morning. So within this space of time, we will try to hit all the important topics. We're going to talk about the types, sources of financial aid, the application process itself, what forms are required, how you get them, what you do with them, how the colleges make financial aid decisions. That's always a big one that I love to spend a lot of time on. So I'll try to be very succinct, though. That's the most interesting part, I think, to me. Paying for college, how families are given information or what information families are given on how to pay, and then free resources at the end. And to that point, you all being involved with MEFA right now, I have to say, my colleagues for years and years, whenever we need to look something up or try to find answers to something about the industry, I go to MEFA because their resources are always spot on, always accurate, and way more interesting, quite frankly, than the Department of Education's articles and things like that. So hopefully you all bookmarked the information that Julie gave you earlier, because I've got it bookmarked on mine, and pretty much all of my financial aid pals do as well. So to start with the types and sources of financial aid, there are kind of three parts of financial aid resources. The Department of Ed, or the federal government, gives out our financial aid. Oops, I'm at the wrong topic. I'm talking about what is financial aid. Three parts of financial aid: grants and scholarships, gift aid. The best kind of financial aid does not have to be paid back. I'll get in a little more detail about those types of grants in a minute. Federal work study, employment on campus. I'm going to talk about that in a little more detail. And then, of course, federal student loans. Many families, and you've probably heard this before, think that, oh, all the college gave me was a loan, and that's not financial aid. Technically, it is considered a resource or part of the financial aid umbrella. So the three main parts that families will need to see or need to be acquainted with are grants, student employment, and loans. The loans are, I always call them a necessary evil for high cost institutions. And some of your families will not need student loans if they're going to a lower cost institution. But the thing that financial aid administrators try our best to talk with families about is that loans are, if they are necessary, they don't have to be evil. In other words, the federal government has designed these loan programs to be very student friendly, in that interest is often not accrued until after students graduate. The repayment options are plentiful as compared to a typical personal loan through a bank. The interest rate is fixed, and over the past few years, it's been pretty low. It's creeping up a little bit, but not nearly at the rate of credit cards or personal loans or our mortgages. And it's they really are the best place to start when students are asking, well, I need to get a loan, I don't know where to start. Federal loans are the place to start. And as you can see on the chart, for most first-year students or freshman year, they can borrow up to $5,500. Some families are under the impression that it's unlimited borrowing amount or a line of credit, but it's really, there are maximums. $5,500, it rises up $1,000 in the sophomore year, and then junior and senior years, it caps out at $7,500. Another important thing, actually, I'm going to just quickly say is, when your families or when your students are comparing financial aid offers, I like to recommend that they ask what the average indebtedness is of the college, like of a college graduate that the school that they're looking at. And that answer can be wide, and the range can be quite large. So it's just important to sort of get a feel for the college's philosophy on borrowing. If their students are graduating with $50,000 in debt and it's just an undergraduate degree, that's a high amount. On average, students in New England or through the federal student loan program are borrowing less than $30,000. So it seems like a lot, and to families who have never borrowed before, that can seem like a real lot. But then you kind of put it in perspective, and what financial aid offices do is we'll put it in perspective as far as what that translates to when you graduate in terms of a repayment. The sources of financial aid come from 4 different places for the most part. The federal government, I started to talk about that before. They are a huge source of grants, free money. College student work study, that's subsidized by the federal government as well. The student loans that we just spoke about on the prior slide. And then there are tax incentives so that parents are able to sort of get a little bit of a benefit, and students, if they pay a certain amount of tuition, they can write it off at the end of the year. Studentaid.gov is the end all be all website for federal programs. Students who live in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts are very fortunate in that we have a really robust program of grants and tuition waivers and no interest loans for students who reside in the state. So that's at mass.edu and OSFA. Some of you, or many of you, may already know of that organization. The colleges and universities themselves are a really great resource for grants, loans, and some of them also subsidize work study. And then other agencies, I always make sure that families are aware. Local communities, you all work at the high schools that perhaps have your own databases, or you know of a local community database that you can refer students to. MEFA Pathway and fastweb.com are really, really great resources as well. And I do recommend to families that it can be worth the searching online and going through these databases. If it results in $500 or $5,000, either way you look at it, it's worth your time to search those databases. And it's always fun to throw out this humongous number of billions and billions of dollars or amount of financial aid that's received by students each and every year. Talking about the best part is the grants and the scholarships, the money that you don't have to pay back. Students are going to see 2 kinds of grants and scholarships: merit-based scholarships and need-based scholarships. So first I'm going to talk about the merit scholarships. Colleges and universities will award students these types of scholarships based on their achievements in high school, and it could be academic, could be musical, it could be their athletic prowess. It has nothing to do with financial need. These scholarships, your students need to know and make sure they understand, are they renewable or not? Is it just for the first year? For the most part, they are renewable, but it's something really important to ask when they are offered a merit scholarship. Sometimes a separate application is required, but sometimes not. Just applying to the college may put them in the running for merit scholarship assistance. And deadlines are super important. A lot of colleges will be very strict with the deadlines when it comes to awarding lots and lots of dollars. The other type of grants and scholarships are need-based, and that does have everything to do with finances and applications such as the FAFSA and the CSS profile that we'll talk about in a little bit. Need-based grants and scholarships are based on a formula and a family's calculated eligibility or need. Colleges will use standardized formulas to determine a student's need-based aid, and it's grants and scholarships, but it can also include subsidized loans and federal work study. So the FAFSA is the all-important form, first and foremost, to determine a family's need or eligibility for need-based aid. Again, merit scholarships do not usually take an application year after year, but the need-based aid, the families will always have to apply year after year. And then finally, students do have to maintain a level of satisfactory academic progress. So the federal government has strict rules in place so that financial aid offices aren't awarding a student, a lifelong student who just wants to keep going to school year after year. They have to graduate within a certain amount of time. They also have to maintain a particular GPA that shows progress. So now we're going to talk about the applications. So much fun. Timelines, families, and you all in guidance offices are uber aware of timelines and deadlines, but students, families, parents, guardians really need to be aware of application deadlines. And some colleges will be very similar in their deadlines, and some will be way out there with different ones. So, I go back to my Google sheet or my Excel spreadsheet and put down all of the colleges that my kids were looking at and then the dates that everything was due, just to be organized. It's super important, these deadlines, as much as students and parents sometimes procrastinate, depending on, your students better than anybody. Some of them are right on top of those deadlines and some of them need a little nudging, but that's deadline is something that you can't say probably enough. MEFA's got a really cool tool. I'm going to keep saying that. And they have an organizational application manager that families, you should keep this, the website that's on the slide, families can use it to keep organized. And it really is, it makes what can be or feel like overwhelming amount of dates and information. It organizes it really well. So let's talk about the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. All colleges and universities that administer need-based financial aid require the FAFSA. Families have to do it each and every year. Students, usually the FAFSA would be available next week, but this year it is delayed until December. We are saying December. I'm personally hoping it's available right around the first week in January. Back in the olden days, probably 8 years ago, the FAFSA, those of you who are, maybe there's nobody on the call that was doing this 8 years ago, but FAFSA used to be available January 1st every year. And then the government changed the formula a little bit and made it available earlier, which was really helpful for families and students who wanted to apply to colleges early decision and early action. It enabled financial aid officers to create a financial aid award for those early applicants. However, with the changes to the FAFSA formula and the form itself, the government needed a little extra time, even though they began this process 2 years ago, to get this released, to get the application up and running and released to the colleges. And frankly, the colleges we need extra time to get our systems in place and our software up to date and ready to receive this new FAFSA information. So FAFSA.gov is supposedly going to have this ready in December for your students and families. Students will put their information on, but also their parents. And they are now called contributors. So we're going to talk about some new language in the FAFSA application itself. A contributor is anybody whose information is going to be on the FAFSA. So it could be an adoptive parent, it could be a parent, certainly the student, everybody's contributing to the FAFSA application. The student needs to start the FAFSA themselves by getting what's called an FSA ID. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. And then they invite anybody else to the form to contribute their information. So I think right now it's a little bit tricky. I'm stumbling over the words only because this is brand new to me, but for families who are just starting the process, this will all feel, everything's new. So it won't be confusing. I think it's these next couple of years that we're all going to be, if you've done it for the few prior years, it's just a little bit of new language to get used to. Similar to prior FAFSAs, the student has a section, the parents have a section, and now we're going to say that each contributor has a section of the FAFSA to do. And then the last person who's completing the FAFSA or contributing to the FAFSA can submit it. It doesn't have to be the student like it does now. One brand new thing, and we are learning, I have to say, MEFA, financial aid offices, all of us, we're learning new things every day about this process. And most recently, I have learned that after 45 days of a student beginning their FAFSA, If it's not completed and submitted, then the FAFSA gets deleted and a student has to start all over again. That is very different than the FAFSA of today, of this academic year. So they're telling us reminders are going to be sent so that hopefully this won't happen very often. I know my students better, and I'm afraid that it might happen more often than not. Hopefully, though, this FAFSA is simplified and it will be easy to restart. But I think it's important right from the get-go to let our families know that once you start the FAFSA, just do it all in one day if you can. If the contributor needs a couple of days to get their stuff together and to do it, that's okay. But after 45 days, the whole thing has to start over from scratch. And when you're looking at deadlines, that can be a pretty important thing. So I mentioned earlier the FSA ID. This is how families will submit the FAFSA electronically. No more paper, no more signatures. It's all electronic. FSA ID gives the students and families and contributors a username and a password that will be theirs for life if they take good care of it. You need that information to log into the FAFSA. Students can do it now. It doesn't need to, the FAFSA doesn't have to be available for next year to do that. So if you are, talking with your seniors, if you're having some seminars or college preparedness activities, have them set up their FSA ID. It's very easy. And it's nice to have ahead of the time when they really have to get that FAFSA done in January. Students need an email address. And a really great tip that a wise financial aid person said one time is to not use don't necessarily use the student's school email address, but to create a family email address. So for example, when my kids were applying to college, we set up a Gmail address, beard@gmail.com, and all of us had access to that email box, so that when the Department of Ed and the FAFSA sent a notice that the FAFSA was processed, my daughter knew, but I knew as well. When the college is sent, don't forget to send in this form that we asked you for 3 weeks ago. My son saw it and ignored it, but I didn't. So it really does, it gave me peace of mind as a mom. But it's also, I think it's a way that as much as I wanted my kids particularly and personally to do this on their own, I knew better that they still needed a little bit of help. So to have a family email is one of the best pieces of advice I've heard in a long time for this process. So the student will get their FSA ID, their spouse if they're married, but for the most part, we're going to assume that they're all dependents of their parents. Every parent on the FAFSA needs an FSA ID. However, if parents are married and they file jointly, that means it's one set of tax information, so only one parent needs an FSA ID. If they're married filing separately, then both parents will need an FSA ID. It's really based on the tax information that's with the federal government is kind of what drives who needs to be a contributor on the FAFSA. Okay, and there are some families sometimes or parents that don't have a social security number, and they can still access this based on some knowledge-based questions that are asked. So the information on
Susan, can I just interrupt you for
Yes.
1 sec? I
Please.
have heard that the students who need to use the knowledge-based process that they're not able to use it yet. Is that true? I think they'll
Oh,
be able to use it soon, but I don't
okay.
think that process is set up yet. So
Okay, great. Thank you.
more information will be coming on that, but they will have a process and it should be soon. Okay, thanks.
Super. Thank you.
That was something new that we heard. Thank you.
Great. Every day there's something.
I know.
Are there any questions at this point, Julie?
No, a
Great.
few that I've been answering behind the scenes, but
Super. Thank you.
great.
Let's talk about what's on the FAFSA itself. Some of the stuff is the same as usual and some of the stuff is different. So citizenship status has not changed. Students, US citizens, eligible non-citizens can receive federal financial aid. Brand new and exciting and excellent is that undocumented students in Massachusetts now are eligible for Massachusetts in-state tuition and state aid, which is a wonderful thing. Um, college, and I'll assume that all of you are from Massachusetts colleges, I think, or high schools, colleges where each student is applying will receive the FAFSA, and students are able to put, I believe it's up to 20 colleges now. It used to be 10 colleges at a time, but now students can put up to 20 colleges on the FAFSA itself. So that's awesome too. Parental information, their marital status, and here's a question we get a lot. If my parents aren't married, do I have to put both of their information on? Yes, if they live together in the same household, even if they're not married, the FAFSA does require information from both parents. Divorced and separated parents, though, it's a little bit different and it can be tricky, and it seems like no two situations are exactly alike. So if you have a student or a family who's asking which parent fills out the FAFSA, that's a very common question each and every year. It's the parent who provided the most financial support, whether that's the custodial parent, in other words, the student lives with that parent most of the time, or not. It's the one who provides most financial support. Usually that is the custodial parent, but sometimes it's not. And then you'll get the next layer of questions. Well, my parents, I live with them equally, 1 week here, 1 week there. Then we go to the second level and we say, well, whichever parent gives you the highest financial support, that's the person who fills out the FAFSA. And there is within the FAFSA itself some questions that help, who's my parent, and they can click on that information to get more defined or better definition of which parent to use. I will say for you as guidance counselors to encourage your students, because after after they do it this once with you, they're off on their own, but it's much easier when a student has a consistent information from year to year in the college. Now, I know it's not always true that a student will remain with the same parent year after year, or even receive financial support equally year after year. But generally speaking, that does happen. What is really difficult is when we get a FAFSA 1 year and then they flip to the other parent the next year, and then back and forth. We do have to ask more questions. It takes a little bit longer. So I always encourage students to try to be as consistent as possible for their situation. Legal guardians are not parents. That's another question we get all the time. I live with my legal guardians, whether they're my grandparents or my older siblings. They are not considered parents, and they do not have to put information on the FAFSA, with the caveat that if the legal guardians have adopted that child, then they do need to put that information on. Number in household is going to be pulled from the tax return or the IRS database, but families do have the opportunity to update that on the FAFSA. One big example is if a parent is divorced and they have one dependent 1 year, and then the next year they have a different dependent or an additional dependent. That could be a situation arrived at based on their divorce decree, and not necessarily who's living in their household. So while it does get pulled off of a tax return, there is opportunity to change that on the application itself. And finally, the number of children in college in the household is still going to be asked on the FAFSA, despite the fact that it is no longer part of the financial aid need analysis. So this can be really confusing. One of the big headlines that we've been reading is with this new FAFSA formula is that number in college doesn't count like it used to. And yet the FAFSA is still going to ask that question. So just if a family has the question, why are they asking it? They are still collecting that data. Colleges may still want to know how many students in the household are attending college for their own institutional money. So there are a number of reasons why it's still asked, but it does create a little bit of confusion, in my opinion. Financial information on the FAFSA, we're going to be looking at, or it's going to be collecting data from 2022. So we affectionately refer to it as prior year. So students are entering college in 2024, but they're reporting data that happened or that was earned in 2022. The contributors on the FAFSA will give the FAFSA permission to pull in information from the IRS. They have to give consent. It's highly confidential, and it's not even seen on the form itself. It just sort of flows into the form, and is not even presented, I guess, on the screen to the families. Anything that's on the tax return, taxable and untaxed income, will be present and will be pulled into the FAFSA. On the asset side, these are self-reported because obviously assets are not on a tax return. But students and families need to include the value of their savings accounts, their checking accounts, investments. Businesses and farms are collected. The value of a business and farm is now collected again on the FAFSA form, and any other property other than their primary residence will be collected on the FAFSA. That is the same as always. This is a change for 529 accounts, so college savings plans. In prior years, this question collected the value of all 529 plans that a parent owned, but now it's only asking for the 529 plan that is for that particular student on the FAFSA. Did I say that right, Julie? Okay. Good. You're nodding. I can't hear. Oh, great. Thumbs up. That is that is a change. And I think it's a good change because we financial aid officers often had, well, I've got all these other children that I've saved for, and I have to put their savings on this child's FAFSA. Nope, they've refined that question. So I think that's a little bit better. Again, they shouldn't include their primary residence. We see that happen more often than you'd think. And that can really skew the analysis for a family for federal aid when it is not supposed to include the value of or the equity in a person's home. Don't include the value of their retirement plans, life insurance, and again, 529s for other children. Another change to the FAFSA, if this is your first FAFSA go around, it won't make a difference, but if you've been doing this before with families, child support received used to be considered income received in the calendar year. Instead, now child support received is going to be included as an asset to the family. And assets are treated less heavily, if you will, in the formula than income. So in this regard, this is another thing that's going to help families, especially families who there are some single parents who rely solely on child support to meet their financial obligations. So it won't be included as income now, it will be included as an asset. MEFA is going to help families with a deep dive into the FAFSA and really go over all these questions in detail. So keep this date in mind, December 13th, and refer your families to that. I think it'll be really much more helpful than what I'm presenting today, and in a lot more detail.
No, it's great, Susan. I just have one question that I think it might help to address here. Someone asked the question, is parent interchangeable with guardian? So I thought you might just want to address that.
Right. So for FAFSA purposes, it is not. A parent, a guardian, legal guardian or otherwise, is not obligated to put their information on the FAFSA. Again, unless that guardian has adopted the child. So a lot of times I'll see grandparents who have been a guardian for their grandchild for years and years and years, but never legally adopted them. And they do not have to put their information on the FAFSA. That child is considered independent for purposes of the FAFSA. So in addition to the FAFSA, many of you may be familiar with the CSS profile, and a lot of private colleges and universities require the CSS profile be collected as well as the FAFSA. It is not a free CSS profile like the free application for federal student aid, but I'm just so impressed that the College Board has kept the price the same for, I would say, almost a decade. It does cost $25 to process and then $16 for each additional college to receive that information. but there are fee waivers available, and if parental income or family income is less than 100,000, families can qualify for that. So that's a huge improvement over just even a few years ago. Fewer and fewer families do find that they have to shell out a lot of money for the CSS profile. This application is available next week. And it's sort of, I like to say it's the FAFSA on steroids. It asks many of the same questions that the FAFSA will ask, but also it goes into much greater detail. For instance, it'll ask for 2022 earned income, but it will also ask for 2023 and 2021. So it gives the colleges a better picture of a family's situation and not just 1 year in time. The CSS profile will also ask for home equity and the value of a home if a family owns a home as part of that information collection. And colleges and universities will use the data from the CSS profile to determine eligibility for their own institutional grants and scholarships. So again, while the FAFSA collects information for federal student aid, and some colleges will use it for their own institutional resources, the CSS profile is collected with more data points to further refine a family's eligibility for institutional grants and scholarships. So that can be confusing for families going through this process, especially if they've got 3 or 4 or 10 colleges that they're applying to. So it's really important that they keep straight. All the colleges across that Google spreadsheet will want the FAFSA, but only some of the colleges will want the CSS profile. And then some colleges will want a third application, their own institutional application, or they may have kind of taken the questions from the CSS profile and created their own institutional application. So again, that spreadsheet comes into play in helping families understand which colleges want which applications.
And Susan, I have another question here.
Sure.
Does the CSS profile have any retrieval technology with the IRS? That's the question.
Yes and no. Unfortunately not. It is because the FAFSA is a federal form. They were able to work out all those systems that are necessary to have the data feed back and forth. CSS profile is manually reported. So if a family asks you, this is kind of always an interesting data point. Families will come to us and say, I don't have a whole weekend to do these forms. And really, it shouldn't take a whole weekend. The FAFSA, I think on average, Julie, I don't know if you've heard this, it takes less than 30 minutes for the FAFSA to be completed if everything goes smoothly. The CSS profile, I don't know the exact minutes, but I would say less than an hour. So it does take a little bit longer. Again, it depends how organized the family is. If they have to pause and find tax returns, or if they have to save it and go to an appointment or whatnot. It can, I guess, feel like it takes a weekend.
I was just going to say, having completed it a number of times, I'd say get a strong cup of tea, whatever that means.
Right, absolutely. Yep, I used to have a slide that I showed actually a cup of coffee and a bottle of ibuprofen before they actually did these forms. But the other tidbit too that you can tell your families is it gets easier after the first year. This first year is really, it can seem a little bit traumatic, but if you're organized and if you just take it one question at a time, I think families who are form phobic are surprised to find out that the logic now incorporated into these forms do help them out in terms of filling it out with fewer and fewer questions or hurdles.
And just a follow up for the question, Susan, also, so what does someone need to complete their CSS profile? They need their tax return with them, pay stubs as well.
Yeah, tax return, W-2 forms, income or bank statements for the actual when families are asked for asset information, it's as of the day that they fill out the form. So to get a year-end investment statement really wouldn't help unless, of course, you're filling it out on December 31st. It's really the asset information. Oh, one question about value of homes. Some people say, I don't know the value of my home. What do I have to hire an appraiser? And that's certainly, I wouldn't recommend they have to do that. They can use Zillow. They can talk to their neighbor down the street who might know of, another house that's for sale and kind of what the neighborhood price is going for. colleges and universities are very aware of the real estate market and which states have higher costs of living than other states. You know, my house in Massachusetts is going to have a different value than my friend's house in Arkansas, even though her house is much, much bigger. And so those things are kind of built into the formulas that we use at our schools. So for families that get too bogged down in, knowing their home value to the dollar, help them relax a little bit and say, a general idea is fine when they're putting down that value. But as far as their own investments, they should be able to draw up, their, as of today, what their investments are worth and put that on the profile and the FAFSA. Okay, so I'm going to speed things up a little bit. After your students apply, they should know the colleges. That's when we and state organizations get that information electronically. The students and families, parents, contributors will receive FAFSA submission summary, FSS. That's a new term. Used to be the student aid report, SAR, but now it's the FAFSA submission summary by email. Again, if you have that family email, everybody will know that application has been processed. Colleges may be in touch with you with your families to get additional information, verification documents. Some of you may know that FAFSAs are randomly chosen for verification. And what that means is that colleges and universities, we get your FAFSA, we get a student's FAFSA, and sometimes we have to go an extra mile to verify all the data that's on that FAFSA. So families should never feel like they're singled out for any particular reason when they're selected for verification. Just tell them to do what the college asks in a timely manner so that we can determine financial aid awards as quickly as possible. So we'll review the FAFSA, we'll review the profile, we'll review the institutional aid application and determine a financial aid officer. Some colleges will release that financial aid offer with the admission decision, and some will do it a little bit later. So it all depends on the college, but families should be aware or ready for either answer, whether it will come together or not. With the new FAFSA not being available till December, I alluded to this a little bit earlier today, that some schools are going to be using the CSS profile to determine earlier financial aid awards in the fall for their early decision and early action candidates, and then follow it up with a real award once the FAFSA is ready. College websites, those are critical to pay attention to this year, because we are updating, MEFA is updating, we're all updating our information almost daily. It's not a joke. We're learning things each and every day. And families, our main goal is to help families understand that they do not have to commit to a college without knowing how much it's going to cost them. So early action, early decision deadlines to deposit may be extended more than any other year, so that families really do have an ample amount of time to get a financial aid award and know what it will cost them to enroll. Verification I spoke about earlier. Make sure your students and families, one, don't feel bad about being selected for verification, and two, comply with anything that the financial aid office is asking for. Financial aid office is a great partner for your families, for your parents and students especially. I love when the students email us and call us directly. 9 out of 10 times it is mom or dad or their adoptive parent calling us, but a lot when a student makes their way through and says, I'm trying to get down to the bottom of what I need to do, we're so proud of them. And it can be scary for them to do, but it's part of life's lessons to take care of their business and their applications. Make sure that everything's in on time. Make sure they're relaying to the financial aid offices on college campuses what, there might be an extraordinary circumstance that a FAFSA is not gonna show. Tax returns, income situations back in 2022 could be very different than what's happening now in 2023 or about to happen next year. So make sure your students feel comfortable in reaching out, or at least getting on a Zoom with their parent, because the more they're aware, the more helpful it is once they progress in college. This is the fun part, I think, how decisions are made, how we calculate a school, families or students' financial aid packages. Each and every year, the students will fill out their applications for need-based financial aid, and we take the cost of attendance, which is the typical things that you would think that go into a budget. Our colleges, tuition, fees, mandatory fees, room and board if they are living on campus, lab fees, anything that is actually billed on a college bill. Those are called direct or billed expenses. That's part of our cost of attendance. The other part that goes into our budgeting are the non-billed things. Students will have to obtain books and supplies, but that's different for every single student. So that's not on a college bill. Transportation to and from college. We have students at Wheaton that live down the street in Mansfield. We also have students at Wheaton that live in Hawaii, and their travel expenses are much different than the student that lives in Mansfield. So we build that transportation cost for our students that live further away into our budget. And personal expenses, that includes stuff that they need for their dorm, stuff that they need to like a laptop or anything that has to do with their collegiate experience or academic experience during the year will be built into the cost of attendance. So once we have that budget, we will then take the results of the FAFSA and the profile, and it's now called it used to be the expected family contribution for years and years, and families were rightly so under the impression that whatever the FAFSA said was their expected family contribution is what they had to pay. And that's not always the case. Many of you know that that's the minimum amount that families will have to pay, and then the colleges can do whatever they want in terms of filling that financial aid eligibility with their money. So now the results of the FAFSA is called the Student Aid Index, and it gives us a number that enables us to determine eligibility for a federal Pell Grant. It will give us a number on which to base our financial aid packages, but it won't be as confusing, I think, for families. Instead of hearing that expected family contribution, now it's more of an index that allows us to assess eligibility. So that might be, hopefully, the intent is to be a little more simple for families to understand. Colleges that require the profile will or may use an institutional formula. So it kind of takes that SAI and then adds a little bit a lot of times. When the profile requests the home equity, for example, that's going to increase the FAFSA SAI theoretically if they have equity in their home. On the flip side, some colleges are still going to include or put emphasis on the number of students, number of children in college in one academic year. So when the FAFSA formula does not include that, the CSS profile or the institutional formula at some colleges may include it. This is where it gets so tricky for families to understand, like, why is one form collecting this data and this other form's collecting another data, and it's all for the same school. And it all at the end of the day is to determine their eligibility for as much financial aid as possible for that family. Julie, I'm so impressed to see that MEFA has an SAI calculator now for families to go in and to play around. I am also going to use that SAI calculator because it is such a different formula than what we grew up with and know and love. So I think it's a great tool to direct families to. Guidance counselors, if you want to go in and play with it too. You can see how the questions differ from last year or from prior years. And then what we're doing, Julie, at our school, for some families, for our returning students, is to take this year's EFC, plug it into the new SAI calculator, and see how much of a change, if any. Yes. The government is telling us, friends at high schools, that this new formula was created to expand eligibility for students, for families to get more Pell Grant. There are some populations, however, that will lose their Pell Grant, and those are the families with where they would benefit from more than one in college, and now they're not going to have that benefit. So colleges and universities are scrambling to figure out how we can help those families. Do we have the extra money to make up for loss of Pell Grants? We're not sure. We don't know how really it's going to affect our returning students at this point. So that's a little bit too much in the weeds for everybody, but I just wanted to kind of tell you some of the things that we're grappling with, and that perhaps your families with older siblings in college may be asking questions about.
And thank you, Susan, because some of the questions behind the scenes have been about that. And yeah, yep.
Yeah. It's
Thank you.
it'll even out in a few years, but these next couple years are going to be a little tricky for families. And if you have families asking, just encourage them to talk to the financial aid office. We are more than happy to sit and take a little longer than usual to go over family situations and talk about what that means for them for future financial aid eligibility. So I'm going to quick go. I know everybody's probably got things to do in a few minutes, but colleges, we will take our cost minus that student aid index and determine what the financial aid eligibility is for students. I'm going to fill this in real quick. When we award financial aid, we're going to take that SAI here at the bottom. That's the basis of what families will need to pay. And then we'll fill in this particular, used to be a barrel, but now it's a big chart. This block it signifies the cost of the college. So it's this particular college costs $45,000. So it's probably a private school. In our financial aid package here, we've got grants and scholarships of $27,500. We've plugged in some student loans and a job on campus that is not obligatory. It is optional, but it does count as financial aid. So this family has a total package that still leaves this unmet need at the top of $5,000. All said and done equals $45,000. So this particular family, even though their SAI is $5,000, that's their minimum amount they're going to pay. They're also going to be responsible for paying up to or another $5,000 or so. I feel like I'm not saying that very gracefully, but hopefully everybody got the gist of that. Net price calculated.
And Susan, I don't know if this is the right place for that, but sometimes I think on either this chart or the coming up one, someone asked, could you talk about how outside scholarships affect financial aid? So
Yes.
maybe that's a place, or in the next slide. Yeah.
I like to talk about it here actually, because
yeah, great.
So while all these resources on this page can't go above the cost of college, $45,000, there is still room, if you will, at the top of this chart. The unmet need is the amount of money that the college didn't fund for this particular family. And if they got an outside scholarship from the local community organization or the Girl Scouts of America or Coca-Cola or Bill Gates, that can fill that unmet need up to $5,000. And then the family has resources that equal 45. Sometimes students will get even more in outside scholarships than their unmet need. You've all got some superstars, I know, at your high schools that are going to apply for lots of things or are eligible for lots of things and then ultimately get more than their unmet need. And it's really important for them to ask the colleges and universities what they'll do to the financial aid package. Most colleges, I'm happy to report, will then go, if this particular student, let's in this example, receive $10,000 of a scholarship, it fills in the $5,000 of the unmet need, but then we would at Wheaton and a lot of other colleges would remove the work and the loans. We would fill in these what's called self-help portion of the package. The last thing colleges want to do is reduce their grants and scholarships. We want to reward the student for doing the research, for receiving that outside award, and help them maybe not work their first year or maybe take less of a loan their first year. What does get tricky about these outside scholarships that students are sometimes surprised about is that they're only for 1 year. They're not renewable. So when you are directing your students to outside scholarship research, one of the key things is to find the renewable ones so that that does give them that resource for not just the first year, but for subsequent years as well. Net price calculators, some of you may be using these already. Each college and university has this on their website. It's a tool that we have that will enable families to get an estimate of if they applied to the college and were accepted, what their financial aid would be, both merit and need-based aid. Now, I have to say that this with a caveat that most of our calculators are not up to date for 24-25, and that's simply because of this brand new formula that the government is still releasing and our software developers are still implementing. So they're out there, but they really need to be taken with a grain of salt for this first transitional year. Here's another chart, real quick. I'll try to explain as quickly as I can. This is just to display how financial aid award letters can vary, even if the colleges all cost the same. So here are 3 colleges, A, B, and C. They all cost $45,000, but you can see that each college awards very differently. We're back to our family with this SAI of $5,000. And you can see across the top line, College A probably has the biggest endowment because their scholarships are quite generous. College B goes down a little bit and College C even further. Student loans, that if you remember back to when I was talking about student loans, freshmen, first year students can borrow a maximum of $5,500. So that's going to be a standard amount that most of your students will see in their packages. Work study, very similarly, ranges anywhere from $3,000 to $1,500, depending on where the college is located. But $2,000 is a very, very common amount of employment to see on a package. So the grants and the scholarships really are the thing that varies from college to college. So all 3 colleges cost $45,000, but your student here has to grapple with unmet need of nothing or $7,000 or $15,000. So that College C is going to be the most expensive option for that particular student. And the types of awards in financial aid award letters can vary. So we've got these 3 colleges again, all costing $45,000. College A, it continues to be my favorite college with the most generous grants and scholarships. They've put grants and scholarships, loans, and work with that unmet need of $5,000. Not so bad. College B, though, has included this new line, parent loan of $10,000. So at first glance, it looks like it's as generous as College A with the $35,000 bottom line, but they've incorporated a plus or a parent loan in this package. And College C, definitely not my favorite. No grants and scholarships, only loans in the package. But again, at first glance, you would say, oh, they also gave us $35,000. But really, it's just in loans, and only the student loan is guaranteed. The parent loans are based on credit. So schools that offer or put parent loans in a financial aid award letter are not doing families such a great service, because that's not a guarantee. They have to apply for those loans and be approved based on their credit. But this is just a great example to show when a student shows you their financial aid award letters, they're all giving me $35,000. The makeup of that money is very, very different. Families have lots of different options to pay for colleges, and here at Wheaton and all of my financial aid friends across the country, we are busy all spring and summer helping families figure out, as are my MEFA colleagues, helping families figure out how they can finance, let's say, a $20,000 bill. So we do say, kind of look at it from 3 ways. How much money do you have in your savings account that you can afford to put towards college? Both the student and parent. This family has $5,000 they can contribute. Current wage, so that's kind of from their past income. Present income, what they're making currently, how much can they afford month to month in a payment plan, or each semester in a payment plan? That's out of their current income. This family can do $5,000 out of their current income as well. That leaves $10,000 left to finance. And so then we say, let's look at your future income or your borrowing capacity, and how much money do you think you can borrow and afford in a longer term situation. And so by savings and payment plan and future income with a loan, this family is able to cover that full $20,000. Sounds simple, not always that simple, but there are, I like to just tell families that you don't have to necessarily have $20,000 at your disposal. There's lots of different puzzle pieces to fit together to make the financing work. It's so important that the families are having these family conversations, and mom and dad, or mom and dad aren't just caught talking behind closed doors. The students need to know really what it's going to cost them as a family. And if a four-year college is not affordable right away, perhaps it might be a good discussion to start at a community college and get those credits needed to transfer into a four-year degree at a much lower price. It's not always the conversation that the student wants to have, but it can be a really great way to still ultimately get a four-year private college degree with a much lower cost. Families have to think about how many students they're financing for college. If it's just their one and done, then they have a lot more ability to kind of think creatively with their finances. If they've got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 kids, they really have to be careful and not take all of their college savings and put it into that one student. Because it's not just a one-year thing, it's a 4-year thing, and then multiply that by number of students in the household. Graduate school, need to think about more and more of our sons and daughters are going to graduate school. If they borrow a lot for undergrad, what does that leave them, their capacity to borrow in graduate school? All these questions are hard ones, but they're discussions that really need to happen. State financial aid. Again, our students here in the Commonwealth have a lot of options. And by filling out the FAFSA, they are throwing their hats in the ring for mass financial aid as well, which is great. There's no separate application. The deadline for the FAFSA for state programs is May 1st, which actually is much later than a lot of the colleges and university deadlines. So hopefully most of your students will have gotten that FAFSA in way ahead of May 1st. The Office of Student Financial Assistance is going to be in touch with students. They set up their own portal to see their eligibility. And it's just another great resource for students, another username and password they need to remember, but it's a great resource for them. Mass transfer and tuition breaks are available again for students in Massachusetts. It makes the transition from a community college to a 4-year public mass college much more affordable and smooth. Mass transfer, mass.edu mass transfer. Many of you guidance counselors probably already know about these really great programs. And then the free resources, make sure your families are not paying a lot or if any money for people to help them fill out the FAFSA or do the scholarship searches online. There's so much so many free things online available through MEFA, through the colleges themselves. We have FAFSA Day every year, which is free assistance to help filling out these forms. There are webinars each and every week during prime season through MEFA that helps families do this process, fill out the forms, ask questions candidly and openly. Mass Educational Opportunity Centers and MEFA Pathway is another really great organizational tool that's available. So the families need to know these free things. Breaks my heart when I hear that they're paying money for things that they can get absolutely free. Help your students stay on track through senior year. Julie, are these slides available, or is this I love this particular slide for families or for guidance counselors especially.
Yes, so we will send a link to this recording and to the slide deck tomorrow, so you'll have them.
Excellent, yes. Excellent. This is just a really great reminder. And also, what students can be doing now ahead of the time, ahead of when the FAFSA is available. Register for free webinars, read things online. Sign up for emails on mefa.org. It's great to get little reminders free of charge. And then of course we've got our QR code and all of these social media outlets that families, there's no excuse why families should not get information from MEFA now with all of these opportunities. Let's see, where are we for time? Oh,
and I think we're good. I mean, what I'd say is I've been behind the scenes. I've been asking you some questions out loud, behind the scenes answering. So we are up to date with questions. So I think I would just, and given the time, I think I will just say thank you so much. That was so thorough. And we all know it is absolutely wonderful to hear from someone at a college and someone like Susan who is doing this on the other side, helping your students. And the questions were terrific. And so I'll just encourage you to stay in touch with all of the other webinars that we have for you through the MEFA Institute, and for sharing all the events that we have for families and students through our events. So do that, and we'll keep you up to date as we learn more from the Department of Education. And one other piece, I know a lot of you were trying to use that college application manager on one of the early slides, and some of you were having some trouble with that. So we will work on that and make sure that that link takes you to the right place. And with that, I'll just see, I think I have one extra question, which is a thank you, and we appreciate that. So thank you all so much.
I'd like to thank all the guidance counselors too for all their work, all their hard work. Unsung heroes in my mind. Absolutely. So thank you. Guys, I would encourage you, if you have a financial aid person in your town or someone you like to work with, get their phone number. And I have a number of guidance counselors that I work with that email me or call me just every once in a while. You're going to have a student that has a unique situation and you're not quite sure how to counsel them. Just give us a call, because we're all in this together. We are all doing the same kind of work. More than happy. I can speak for my colleagues, and I know they'd be more than happy to help you help them. So thank you for all you do.
Absolutely.
All right.
All right. Well, the sun is shining here in Massachusetts, at least where I am. So go out and have a good day. Good luck with everything. Thank you. And we'll be in touch.